For 3 years, Buckingham Palace chose silence, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. While Meghan Markle crafted narratives and controlled headlines, the royal family maintained what they called dignified silence, a centuries-old tradition that has weathered far worse storms than one former actress with a grudge. But this past month changed everything. As lie after lie unraveled in public view, as damage control failed spectacularly at every turn, something shifted inside those palace walls. The silence didn't break, it evolved. What emerged was something far more devastating than angry rebuttals or defensive statements. It was calculated, coordinated, and utterly ruthless. The royals weren't just reacting to Meghan's month of lies, they were dismantling her piece by piece, using the one weapon she can't defend against, the truth. The first sign that something had changed came not from an official statement, but from absence. Prince William had been scheduled to attend a charity event that Harry had previously supported. Everyone expected the usual diplomatic dance, carefully worded statements about different paths, wishes of well-being, the standard royal playbook. Instead, William showed up and gave a speech that never mentioned Harry once, not a single reference, no acknowledgement that his brother even existed. But he spoke at length about duty, about service, about the importance of putting the institution before personal desires, about how real royalty means showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The subtext was so obvious it didn't need to be stated. One reporter described it as the loudest silence I've ever heard. William wasn't angry anymore. He was done. And being written out of the narrative entirely is somehow worse than being criticized. Behind the scenes, palace insiders say King Charles reached a breaking point during the Archewell Foundation scandal. Watching his grandchildren's trust fund, money that should have been protected for Archie and Lilibet, potentially being funneled through a charity with questionable finances, was the final straw. The king, who had spent 3 years keeping the door open for reconciliation, quietly closed it. Not with dramatic announcements or public statements, just cold, bureaucratic efficiency. Trust fund access modified to require palace approval. Security detail reviews initiated. Legal teams tasked with examining every commercial use of royal titles. One courtier described the king's mood as ice-cold determination, not angry, not emotional, just methodical in protecting the institution from further exploitation. The real shock came when palace lawyers started filing quiet injunctions. Nothing public, nothing that would make headlines, just strategic legal moves designed to constrain without creating martyrdom. Trademark applications for Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet mysteriously blocked. Commercial partnerships involving royal associations suddenly facing legal challenges from crown lawyers. Netflix receiving carefully worded letters about contractual obligations and title usage rights. These weren't aggressive moves, they were surgical strikes, each one closing off another avenue for monetization. And the brilliant part? None of it required the royals to say a single public word. The lawyers did the talking, the bureaucracy did the fighting. The family maintained that dignified silence while systematically dismantling the Sussex commercial empire. Catherine's response was perhaps the most telling. Right in the middle of Meghan's month of lies, she launched a new initiative focused on children's mental health and the dangers of commercial exploitation in childhood development. The timing was not coincidental. Every speech she gave, every photo opportunity she attended was a masterclass in shade without ever naming names. Talking about the importance of protecting children from being turned into commodities, discussing the psychological damage of growing up thinking your value is tied to your marketability, emphasizing that royal children should be seen occasionally but never sold. She never said Meghan Markle once. She didn't have to. The entire media understood exactly what and who she was talking about. It was passive-aggressive royal warfare at its finest. The palace communication strategy shifted in ways that royal watchers found fascinating. For years, Buckingham Palace had operated on a never complain, never explain policy that meant taking hits without responding. But during this month, they started doing something different. Instead of responding to Meghan's claims, they would quietly leak contradicting information to trusted journalists. Not dramatic tell-alls or explosive interviews, just factual corrections with documentation attached. When Meghan's team claimed she had minimal involvement with Netflix, palace sources provided emails showing the opposite. When claims about Invictus emerged, Invictus Foundation documents mysteriously found their way to journalists. The palace wasn't fighting in public, they were providing ammunition for others to do it for them, and it was devastatingly effective. Royal historians started pointing out that this was actually a return to an older, more ruthless version of palace politics. The institution may seem ceremonial and outdated, but it has survived for over 1,000 years precisely because it knows how to eliminate threats. The courtiers who surround the royal family aren't just administrators, they're strategists who have been trained in reputation management since before PR was even a term. One historian compared it to watching a chess grandmaster against an amateur. Meghan was making obvious moves, creating drama, trying for quick wins. The palace was playing 5 moves ahead, setting traps, controlling the board. By the time you realized what they'd done, checkmate was already inevitable. The most shocking backlash came not from official channels, but from extended family members who had previously stayed neutral. Sarah Ferguson, who usually avoids controversy, gave an interview where she spoke about the importance of honoring the institution that gives you privilege. Princess Anne made pointed comments about the difference between working royals and celebrities in royal clothing. Even minor royals who normally stay out of the spotlight started making carefully worded statements about duty and service. It was coordinated without being obvious, a united front without ever explicitly naming the target. The message was clear. You left the family, you attacked the institution, and now you're alone. We're moving on without you. The polling data that emerged during this month told a story that palace officials watched with satisfaction. Support for the monarchy in the UK actually went up during Meghan's scandals, not despite the negative attention, but because of it. The contrast was too stark to ignore. On one side, you had chaos, lies, commercial desperation, and failed damage control. On the other, you had stability, duty, service, and dignified silence. The more Meghan unraveled publicly, the more the traditional monarchy looked like a safe, reliable constant. It was the exact opposite of what her PR strategy intended. She wanted to modernize the monarchy by contrast, to make them look outdated. Instead, she made them look essential. Inside the palace, staff members who had endured years of being painted as racist or cruel finally felt vindicated. Multiple former staffers started speaking to journalists, still anonymously, still carefully, but with a newfound willingness to share their experiences. Stories of bullying, impossible demands, staff members reduced to tears, the culture of fear that existed in the Sussex household before they left. These accounts had been shared privately for years, but people were afraid to go public for fear of being labeled racist. Now, with the month of lies providing cover, the truth started seeping out. And it aligned perfectly with the pattern everyone was now seeing: manipulation, deception, using victimhood as a weapon. The staff were just collateral damage in a larger pattern. What made the royal backlash so effective was its restraint. They never seemed desperate, never defensive, never angry in public view. Meanwhile, Meghan's team was issuing multiple statements a day, each one more panicked than the last. The optics were devastating. One side looked calm, in control, unbothered. The other looked like they were drowning and flailing for anything to grab onto. Royal commentators noted that the palace had learned from past mistakes, particularly the handling of Diana's death and the initial Meghan crisis. They weren't going to be reactive. They were going to be strategic. Let her make the mess. Let her damage herself. Just quietly close doors behind her while she's busy creating drama. The impact on Harry became a subplot that many royal watchers found tragic. Friends say he's caught between realities, the one his wife constructed and the one everyone else can see. Phone calls with his father reportedly deteriorating into arguments about accountability. William not taking his calls at all anymore. Old military friends distancing themselves after the Invictus lies. Harry appears to be living in an increasingly isolated bubble where the only version of reality that's acceptable is Meghan's version. And watching someone you once respected descend into that kind of isolation hits differently. The palace's response to Harry specifically has been what one insider called tough love withdrawal. No anger, no fighting, just consequences. You made your choice, now live with it. The door isn't locked, but you have to admit the problem before you can walk back through it. The financial warfare happening behind the scenes is perhaps the most brutal aspect of the royal backlash. The Sussexes' lifestyle requires an enormous amount of money they're struggling to generate as opportunities dry up. The palace knows this, and they're using it. By threatening legal action against any commercial use of titles or royal imagery, they're effectively cutting off the main value proposition the Sussexes have. Nobody wants to partner with them for their talent or ideas. People want access to royalty. Take away the royal connection legally, and what's left? A former cable TV actress and a prince who abandoned his duties. That's not worth $20 million to Netflix. That's not worth major brand partnerships. The palace is essentially strangling the Sussex business model by threatening to remove the only thing that makes it valuable. Corporate partners started backing away not just because of negative publicity, but because of quiet pressure from palace connections. The British establishment is smaller and more interconnected than Americans often realize. A quiet word from the right courtier to the right board member, and suddenly that lucrative deal falls through. Nothing overt, nothing illegal, just the old boys network doing what it's always done, protecting its own and freezing out threats. Meghan discovered that you can't out-network the literal network that's been running Britain for centuries. Her Hollywood connections mean nothing when palace officials start making calls to the people who actually control British corporate interests. The media coverage shift during this month wasn't accidental either. Palace communications teams have relationships with journalists going back decades. When they want a story planted, they know exactly who to call and how to do it without fingerprints. Suddenly, every major British outlet was running critical Meghan pieces, all properly sourced, all legally vetted, all different enough that you couldn't claim coordination, but all landing in the same week, creating an avalanche effect. This wasn't freedom of the press discovering truth. This was palace machinery using press freedom as a weapon. Meghan's team tried to fight back by claiming media conspiracy, but that just sounded paranoid when the coverage was backed by leaked documents and factual reporting. You can't cry conspiracy when people are quoting your own emails back to you. The Commonwealth reaction added another layer to the backlash. For days after the biggest lies went public, palace officials were on the phone with Commonwealth leaders, reassuring them that these scandals did not represent the values of the crown. Meghan and Harry had positioned themselves as potential Commonwealth ambassadors, suggesting they could modernize and diversify the institution's appeal. Instead, Commonwealth leaders from diverse backgrounds watched a white American woman lie about charity work, exploit her mixed-race children commercially, and claim credit for veterans initiatives she had nothing to do with. The palace made sure every Commonwealth leader saw the full accounting, not as gossip, but as briefings. Here's what actually happened. Here are the documents. Make your own judgment. And they did. Commonwealth support for the traditional monarchy strengthened, while interest in the Sussexes evaporated. One of the most strategic moves came in the form of documentary cooperation. For years, the palace has been extremely cautious about granting access to documentary filmmakers. But suddenly, during this month, a major documentary crew was given unprecedented access to William and Catherine's charitable work with children. The timing was perfect. Right as Meghan was being exposed for exploiting her own children commercially, William and Catherine were being filmed protecting theirs while still serving the public. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was the point, and the palace made sure every moment was carefully documented, beautifully filmed, and distributed to international networks. This is what real royalty looks like, the message said. Service without monetization, privacy with purpose, duty over brand deals. The legal strategies being deployed suggest the palace is done playing nice. Lawyers are examining every Sussex business venture for potential violations of the separation agreement signed when they left royal duties. That agreement had specific clauses about commercial exploitation of royal connections, about maintaining dignity of the titles, about financial transparency in any venture involving royal heritage. For years, these niceties were treated as suggestions. Now they're being treated as contracts, and contracts can be enforced. The nuclear option, stripping the Sussex titles entirely, is reportedly being prepared as a contingency, not as an immediate move, but as leverage. Keep pushing and you'll lose even the titles. Then what's your brand worth? What's particularly striking is how differently each royal is handling the situation publicly. Charles is cold and bureaucratic. William is dismissive and distant. Catherine is subtly shady without ever being explicit. Anne is bluntly critical without naming names. The younger royals are rallying visibly in support of William and Catherine, creating a clear generational alliance. Even the cousins who are close to Harry's age are choosing sides, and it's not his side. The message to Harry is clear. You're not just cut off from your father and brother, you're cut off from everyone. This isn't one relationship breaking down, it's an entire family collectively deciding you're out. There's a psychological warfare element to this that former palace staffers recognize from previous royal conflicts. The institution is patient in ways individuals can never be. They can wait years for someone to self-destruct. They can endure short-term negative press, knowing that long-term stability will win. Meghan is operating on Hollywood timescales, quarterly earnings, next news cycle, immediate brand impact. The palace is operating on generational timescales. How will this look in 50 years? What precedent does it set? How does it affect the institution's survival? That fundamental mismatch in timeframes means Meghan is always reacting, always desperate for the next win. The palace can just wait her out, while systematically removing every support structure she's built. The staff leaks about life in Montecito paint a picture that aligns perfectly with palace intelligence. Reports of increasing isolation, paranoia about who's leaking what, arguments about money and strategy, Harry questioning decisions he never questioned before. The palace doesn't need to actively destroy the Sussex household. They just need to let pressure build while removing escape valves. Every business deal that falls through adds stress. Every legal threat increases paranoia. Every negative news cycle creates more arguments. The palace is creating conditions for implosion while maintaining enough distance that they're not the obvious culprit. When it all falls apart, and insiders say it's when, not if, it will look like Meghan destroyed herself. The palace will just have helped things along. Behind all of this is a cold calculation about legacy and precedent. If Meghan succeeds in commercializing her royal connection while attacking the institution, it opens the door for every future disgruntled royal to do the same. The palace can't allow that precedent, so they have to make an example. Not a cruel example, not an overtly vindictive one, but a clear one. If you leave and attack us, this is what happens. Your commercial value evaporates, your reputation crumbles, your family freezes you out. Your legacy becomes a cautionary tale. It's not personal, it's institutional survival. And institutions are far more ruthless than individuals because they have no conscience to wrestle with, only interests to protect. The month of lies gave the palace everything they needed to move from defensive position to offensive. They weren't creating the scandals, they were just amplifying them, ensuring maximum exposure, making sure the right people saw the right evidence at the right time. Strategic leaking became an art form, nothing traceable directly to the palace, but everything serving palace interests. One communication strategist called it weaponized transparency. Just release the truth in ways that do maximum damage. Let facts speak for themselves. Let contradictions pile up until the weight becomes crushing. The palace didn't need to lie because the truth was so much more devastating than anything they could have invented. As this month draws to close, the shocking backlash from the royals isn't actually shocking at all when you understand what they're protecting. This isn't about personal hurt feelings or family drama. It's about an institution that has survived wars, revolutions, scandals, and centuries of challenges. Meghan Markle is, in their view, just another threat to be neutralized. But they're doing it in the most British way possible, with politeness, with paperwork, with lawyers and bureaucrats, and strategic silence. No dramatic confrontations, no public feuds, just doors closing, opportunities vanishing, support structures crumbling, all while maintaining that famous stiff upper lip and dignified silence. The damage they're inflicting is profound precisely because it's invisible to casual observers. But anyone watching closely can see the machinery at work, grinding slowly but inevitably toward one conclusion. The Sussexes will not win this fight. The institution always survives. Individual celebrities do not. The international diplomatic fallout has been another layer of the royal backlash that's largely flown under the radar but carries enormous weight. Foreign governments take their cues from Buckingham Palace when it comes to protocols involving the Sussexes, and palace officials have been making quiet but unmistakable adjustments. Harry and Meghan no longer receive certain diplomatic courtesies. Official state visits don't include them. Invitations that might have gone their way are quietly redirected. Nothing that would create a diplomatic incident, but enough subtle changes that governments around the world understand the Sussexes are not to be treated as working royals or given platform beyond what private citizens receive. One former ambassador described it as the diplomatic equivalent of being unfriended, polite enough that you can't complain, clear enough that everyone gets the message. The younger generation of royals, William and Catherine's children, Princess Charlotte specifically, represents another strategic element of the royal response. The palace has started allowing slightly more visibility of the Cambridge children, just enough to remind everyone that the line of succession is secure, healthy, and being raised with proper values. Photos of George learning about duty, Charlotte showing compassion at charity events, Louis being a normal, happy kid. The implicit message: we don't need the Sussexes. The monarchy has a secure future without them, and that future looks wholesome, stable, and untainted by commercial desperation. It's generational warfare disguised as family photos. Behind closed doors, the palace has also been conducting what one insider called a relationship audit. Every person, organization, charity, or brand that has maintained ties with both the palace and the Sussexes has been quietly encouraged to choose. Not explicitly, that would be too crude, but through scheduling conflicts, funding decisions, patronage changes, and 1,000 small nudges that make it clear staying neutral is becoming untenable. Most have chosen the palace, because even if you sympathize with Meghan's narrative, even if you believe the monarchy needs reform, you don't bet against an institution that will outlive you, your children, and probably your grandchildren. The castle always outlasts the siege. The PR firms that have worked with the Sussexes tell a story of clients who refuse to take advice. Multiple agencies have reportedly walked away from the account after Meghan overruled strategic recommendations in favor of her own instincts that have now been proven catastrophically wrong. One former PR consultant spoke to a journalist off the record about the impossibility of managing a client who sees every setback as conspiracy rather than consequence. You can't help someone who thinks the problem is always external, they said. The palace knows this. They knew just how patient to be, that she would eventually self-destruct without them having to actually do anything but remove the safety nets. It's psychological warfare at a level most Hollywood operatives can't comprehend. The timing of various palace announcements during the month deserves analysis too. Every time the Sussex scandals reached a peak, the palace would drop positive news: a new charity initiative, a successful royal tour, an announcement about future plans. Never directly responding to the Sussex drama, but ensuring that the news cycle had an alternative narrative, one of competence, duty, and traditional values succeeding where modern celebrity failed. It's narrative management on a national scale. The palace press office wasn't fighting the Sussex PR team. They were just making sure readers always had a more appealing story to focus on. And given the choice between dysfunction and duty, between lies and tradition, the public chose exactly what the palace knew they would. There's also the matter of historical record and how this will be written about in decades to come. The palace has archivists and historians who think in terms of how events will be remembered centuries from now. They're already ensuring that the official record, the documents, the correspondence, the proper accounting paints a very specific picture. Not a malicious one, just an accurate one. When historians write about this era, they'll have access to palace archives showing measured responses, attempts at reconciliation, and institutional protections being deployed only after provocation. They'll see Meghan's shifting stories, contradictory statements, and commercial desperation, all documented and dated. History won't be kind to the Sussexes, and the palace is making absolutely certain of that. The religious element shouldn't be overlooked either. The monarch is defender of the faith and supreme governor of the Church of England. There's a moral authority component to the role that transcends politics or celebrity. When Meghan's lies about charity work emerged, several senior clergy quietly made their positions known. They didn't condemn her publicly, that's not how it works, but sermons about honesty, about the sanctity of charitable work, about protecting children, all delivered in churches with royal connections during the height of the scandal. The moral authority of the institution was being quietly mobilized, and in a country that may be increasingly secular but still respects certain traditions, that carries more weight than Americans often realize. Perhaps most devastatingly, the palace has weaponized kindness. When asked about the Sussexes, royal family members express sadness, not anger, hope for reconciliation, not bitterness, wishes for their well-being, not condemnation. It's impossible to fight against kindness. You can rally against persecution, but how do you create a victim narrative when your supposed oppressors keep saying they love you and hope you find happiness? It puts Meghan in an impossible position. Every angry statement she makes looks petty against a backdrop of royal graciousness. Every accusation seems paranoid when met with expressions of concern for her welfare. The palace has turned emotional jujitsu into an art form. The month of lies became a gift that the royals didn't squander. They took every revelation, every failed damage control attempt, every contradiction, and used it to build an unassailable case for why the institution must protect itself from those who would exploit it. They demonstrated to the public, to the Commonwealth, to potential future problematic royals that leaving and attacking institutions has consequences. Not dramatic, headline-grabbing consequences, slow, methodical, bureaucratic consequences that grind you down until there's nothing left. The lawyers, the courtiers, the communication strategists, the financial controllers, they all worked in concert to dismantle the Sussex brand while maintaining absolute deniability about it being personal. It was just business, institutional protection, nothing more, but nothing less either. For William personally, watching this unfold must bring mixed emotions. He's lost his brother, possibly forever. But he's also been vindicated in every concern he raised before the wedding, every warning he gave that was ignored, every attempt at intervention that was characterized as jealousy or cruelty. Old friends note that William seems somehow lighter now, as if a burden has been lifted. He's not hoping for reconciliation anymore. He's not waiting for Harry to see reason. He's just moving forward with his life, his family, and his future role as king. And that acceptance, that finality, is arguably more devastating to Harry than any active punishment could be. Being cut off hurts. Being forgotten is worse. The palace machinery continues its work, even as we reach the end of this extraordinary month. More doors are closing, more opportunities are vanishing, more former allies are distancing themselves. And through it all, the royal family continues their work. Ribbon cuttings, charity galas, diplomatic functions, the endless round of duty that defines them. They've absorbed the Sussex crisis the way the institution has absorbed every crisis for 1,000 years. Acknowledge it minimally, protect the core, continue the work, wait for the threat to exhaust itself. The backlash wasn't a moment. It was, and is, a process, one that won't end until the threat no longer exists, by whatever means necessary.